Story 1. 2 nights ago, I was sitting at the dining room table, talking to my husband, when I saw the front door handle slowly turn down. The door made a sound as if someone was trying to open it, and then the handle went slowly back up. I tried to come up with 100 explanations and even asked my downstairs neighbor if anything showed up on her security camera. Nothing did. My leg hairs stood on end that night. Story 2. A car without a driver passed me on a deserted road outside Bakersfield. I still think about it 25 years later. Story 3. A three-way intersection, resembling a T shape with the bottom part coming in at an angle, where I was stopped at the light. My light turns green. I am at the top of the T, but there's a car slowly rolling into the intersection from the bottom. The car moves slowly through and gently bumps into the traffic light pole at the top. I can see the driver sitting at the wheel, hands on it, looking completely normal. He hits the pole, slumps forward, and hits the horn with his head. This was before airbags were common, but it was a Volvo, so maybe he didn't hit hard enough and falls forward. I, a 17-year-old, casually get out because this guy is now blocking the road, not out of concern for another person. I was trying to get to a record store to find out that the driver is dead. Luckily, there were some adults at the intersection to handle the situation, but apparently he just had a stroke as he was approaching the light. There is nothing supernatural about it, but I can still see that dead driver driving his car through the intersection. Walking up to his window, I felt frustrated to see a waxy, open-mouthed corpse in a suit with his hands on the wheel and his head on the horn. Story 4. Not seen, but heard. A voice repeated what my brother had just said a moment ago in a mocking tone. We were in our garage when it happened, and it sounded like it came from the front yard, where no one could have possibly heard him. We didn't see anyone there. Story 5. My neighbor overdosed on heroin. I called emergency services after hearing his girlfriend screaming for help. The operator instructed me to go to the body, and it was a shocking sight. He was colorless, with grayish-blue fingers and lips. Story 6. I went to a concert with two neighbors, two brothers. We lived in a slum, and when we returned in the middle of the night, the bus did not enter our neighborhood at night, so we had to walk through the entire slum. I decided not to go with them because I didn't want to deal with the hundreds of dogs along the way. So I walked alone along the road that runs by the edge of the slum, which was a longer walk. When I got to my home on a nearby street, they had encountered a guy they were having trouble with, and they tried to harm him. A lady who lived right by my house told me to go there and call for help. I was joking about it, literally laughing. I was a teenager, and violence was a daily situation for everyone in that place. I thought they had beaten the guy unconscious. He was a kid like me. When I got close, they had tried to burn the guy alive. His skin had come off his body on his back, and his face was a mass of unrecognizable flesh. I had been with them just minutes before. They were about 14 and 16 or 17 years old. It was brutal. How could they burn him alive? It was a huge shock for me. The guy survived but had to run away from the place. Story 7. I had a client who had a reputation as a womanizer. He was in his 50s, balding and pudgy. I never had direct dealings with him, but rather with someone else at his firm. When my client contact left, I had to deal with him directly. He asked me to visit one of his clients on a long road trip, about a 3-hour drive. He brought his 23-year-old account assistant along, a young woman fresh out of college. I sat in the back while they sat in the front. She was really attractive, and being a guy, I noticed. However, I kept things strictly professional. While he drove, he would snake his right hand over the seat and play with her hair. I thought, you, as he twirled strands around his finger and chatted with us about the meeting as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I noticed she kept shifting further and further toward the passenger door until she was basically out of reach. Instead of playing with her hair, he laid his hand on her shoulder. Finally, we arrived and had our 2-hour meeting. When it was time to drive back, I leaned over to Lauren and asked, "Do you want to sit in the back this time?" She said, "Oh God, thank you." She pretended to be ill and sat in the back while I rode in the front with this sleazeball on the return trip. The next day, she called to say thanks and told me how he was relentless in chasing her around the office. When I recommended she get another job, she said, "Trust me, but I need this job right now." A week later, he offered me a job. I said, "Well, Jimmy, thanks for the offer, but anything below a specified amount would be a cut in pay." After that, he and I parted ways, and I couldn't have been happier about it. Story 8. I was visiting my friend in a small town with a population of 700 people. It was quiet at 3 a.m. as we walked through the park in the middle of nowhere. An unmarked white van pulled onto the walkway designated for pedestrians and slowly drove by us, its windows tinted black. It suddenly slammed on its brakes and made a U-turn on the grass. My friend and I panicked and sprinted back to my friend's house as fast as we could, and the van followed us all the way. I had never run into a house so quickly in my entire life. I have no explanation for what that was, but it felt like we were being surveyed and followed. Story 9. I witnessed the sheriff of a small county use illegal substances and then took a young woman to his home. Story 10. I traveled every week in professional sales. While traveling through New England, it was getting late, so I decided to get a room. This place was clean, quiet, and had great views. I had dinner in a local restaurant and took out my book. Just before I turned out the lights, I noticed a logbook on a coffee table. After reading the entries, I found out that this place was haunted. I didn't think much of the haunting stories, so I went to bed. At about 3 a.m., I woke up and saw a face about 6 inches away from me. It startled me, but I went to the bathroom and back to bed. At 5:30 a.m., I woke up to the feeling that someone was sitting on the bed. The sheets and blanket felt tight as if weight was holding them down. At this point, I was wide awake and decided to shave and take a shower. Did I have an experience with a ghost-like creature? I believe so. Story 11. I saw a Wendigo. I was young but old enough to know what I witnessed. I lived in the woods for a while and always disliked it. We were given many safety warnings. Some were strange, like never leaving the window blinds open at night and ensuring all doors and windows were closed and locked. One night, I couldn't sleep and heard unsettling noises. Terrifying noises. I foolishly looked out the window. I will never forget what I saw. It was a real Wendigo, not the fictional deer skull depiction. It was pale and thin, resembling a corpse with long limbs and claws. I screamed but felt paralyzed. My mother ran in, and I told her what happened. She pulled me away from the window and into her room. For the rest of the time we lived there, I refused to sleep alone, and so did my sister and brother. We all slept in the living room on the sofa, love seat, and chair. We left not long after that. Story 12. My mother-in-law is really creepy. She has an eerie appearance that looks uncanny or not quite human. She came over with a mustache like Tom Selleck, and I approached her and her husband to offer tea. My father-in-law was facing me when she turned around, and the look caught me by surprise. Her husband looked at me like it was normal for her to have a thick, manly mustache. Additionally, when she prays, she screams loudly and cries and wails. The fact that all of this is normalized makes me feel extremely creeped out. It's not just the mustache. It's everything. Something is really off and different from anything I've witnessed in someone before. Story 13. Probably when my friend and I saw a car change into a different car behind us in the blink of an eye. We were on a 2-lane road being followed by an SUV with 6-inch circular headlights. There were no turnoffs. Suddenly, the car switched into a sedan with low-profile headlights. I thought I was going crazy and said, "Dude, did you just see?" My friend interrupted and said, "I don't know what just happened, but we need to get away from that car now." Story 14. A man holding a lantern stood still at the side of the road near my boyfriend's place. He got a little closer for the next 2 nights, but I never saw him again after that. Story 15. When I was first married, my husband and I had a cat who used a pet door to come and go often after catching and killing a mouse or gopher, which she would regurgitate inside. One night, we were sleeping and woke to the sound of her hacking in the room with us. Neither of us wanted to get up later and step on a semi-digested small mammal, as I had done so previously. We began asking each other to please get up and turn on the light so it could be cleaned up. I had worked until midnight and had just fallen asleep. After several minutes of heated arguing, the overhead light suddenly came on, seemingly by itself. I am not sure I fell back asleep that night. Story 16. When I was a child, our cat often came into my room, jumped on my bed, walked over me, curled up somewhere, and fell asleep. It was actually really cute, and she did it quite often, even though I sometimes woke up because of it. At times, we both got scared when I woke up and threw the blanket. One day, I woke up because I noticed my door slightly open, and a bit of moonlight came into my room. I am sensitive to light when I sleep, which is why I always keep my door closed, and the shutters are down. I even got special ones that make it completely dark. I saw the light on the ceiling but closed my eyes again. I noticed little footsteps and recognized them as those of my cat. After a decade with the same pet, you become accustomed to its sounds. Then, following the same procedure, she walked in, jumped on my bed, walked over me, curled up on my legs, and went back to sleep. I was somewhat annoyed that she woke me, even mumbled her name in irritation, but I also fell asleep again. Later, I got up and went downstairs for breakfast. As usual, my mom asked me how I slept, and I told her I was quite annoyed because the cat woke me up since someone left my door open. She raised an eyebrow and said that the cat had been outside the whole night, and no one had opened my door. That was over 20 years ago, and I still remember the feeling of the cold chill running down my spine. Story 17. My first and only paranormal encounter involved seeing a faceless old man with a buffalo that changed colors. They climbed into the woods together, and the old man asked for the newborn we had in our hands. This experience was shared by a 27-year-old female, a 10-year-old male, a 12-year-old female, and 3 9-year-old females, along with a 6-month-old baby. The oldest, my aunt, was 27 at the time and fell ill so severely that it took her months to recover. Story 18. Backwoods cult houses. One time, my mom, grandma, and I got lost in the mountains at night. We eventually reached a clearing lined with perfect white houses with no lights or cars, and a large church at the end of the road facing our car. My mom advised my grandma to turn around, but she insisted we should get out and ask someone. As we turned around, a group of people in white robes emerged from the woods holding weapons. We quickly left the area and eventually found a gas station. The cult is known, but their location remains a mystery, and we have no idea what might have happened if we had gotten out of the car. Story 19. This would be pointless to invent and ended up being really problematic. Blood appeared on my walls, floor, and ceilings. Story 20. About 20 years ago, in a house we considered haunted, I was in the kitchen when a fly started buzzing around. It was particularly annoying, so I grabbed a fly swatter and swatted it. I made contact and 2 flies flew off across the room from the impact. I swatted again, and a couple more went sailing across the room. Within a couple of minutes, the room was full of flies, hundreds of them. I even saw them coming from the glare of the ceiling light. I killed several, and after about 15 minutes of feeling like I was in a horror movie, they thinned out and flew into the living room, never to be seen again. There were a couple of hundred dead ones I left in the sink so my wife could see them when she got home. We had a lot of strange occurrences in that house. This was by far the strangest and creepiest, and the only one that scared me. And I'm not afraid of anything. Story 21. I grew up somewhat close to the Rolling Hills Asylum in Bethany, New York. One time, I decided to drive past it just to take a look. Now, you can tour it, but it was a Sunday, so the building was closed. Not only did the building creep me out, but I physically felt the energy around that place shift and became very dark and heavy for about half a mile before and after driving past it. Outside of that radius, everything felt fine and normal. That's one of 2 times in my nearly 3 decades on this earth that I've felt an energy shift around a building. Story 22. I felt unsafe when a sociopath became frustrated with me, his eyes darkening as he pretended to cry. Fortunately, he was a client at a hospital, so he couldn't fully reveal his true self. I could see it, though. It sent shivers down my spine. Story 23. The creepiest thing I've seen happened late one night while driving home from a party. In 2009, outside a small town in Texas on a hilly road, I was coming down one of those hills when I noticed a dark figure in the middle of the road at the edge of my headlights. From what I could make out, it was wearing a long dark coat and a dark hat, but I couldn't see any other features. I shook my head to snap out of it, and it disappeared. I turned to my friend in the passenger seat to see if he had seen the same thing, but he was passed out, leaving just me and, I guess, the Hat Man. The logical part of me says it was just my brain playing tricks, but it still gives me the creeps to this day. Thinking about that made me recall another experience, one that I heard rather than saw. As I mentioned earlier, I lived in a small town in Texas with about 25,000 people at the time, which meant there wasn't much to do late at night. One of the things I did was drive around in the country. One night, while enjoying the cooler night air with the windows down, I was returning to town from the same area as the first story. I made a turn onto the highway that leads back to town when I heard a loud scream or yell, a sound that was hard to describe, coming directly outside my passenger window. When I say loud, I mean the kind of noise that rattles your ears a little louder than the music in my car. I immediately looked out the window and saw nothing. No cars, no people, no clues as to what had just frightened me. Of course, I didn't stick around to investigate further because I didn't want to find out what could make that sound. Story 24. I was sitting in my room when I was about 10, staring at a stuffed dog teddy bear I had. The bear winked at me. I swear I saw it clearly. An eerie cold feeling came over me, and it really freaked me out. Story 25. I saw a child talking to someone in an empty room. Then, they turned to me and said, "Don't sit there, he doesn't like you." There was no one there. I left immediately. Story 26. I experimented with a Ouija board in my childhood, thinking it was a silly joke. I do not want to give the experience any more power, but I cannot stress enough how imperative it is to avoid using them. They are not a game like Monopoly or Life. They are not a mixed medium, which suggests a 50-50 chance of contacting a good or bad spirit, and they are not a psychological mind power play based on subconscious suggestion. Avoid them completely. Story 27. I lived in a house that had some serious paranormal activity occurring. I've seen shadow figures. I was in the living room when I saw the shadow of a man walk past one window on the outside, and then walk past the next window. I thought my brother was outside and about to come through the back door, but he wasn't. I asked my mom what he was doing outside, and she said he was at work. That raised alarm bells that someone was in the backyard, but no one was there. Shadow figures. One night, the lights in my brother's and my shared bedroom started flashing for no reason. My mom came in and it stopped, yet the lights remained on while the switch was in the off position. My sister saw demonic shadows closing in on her from all directions one night. Her rocking chair was moving back and forth by itself violently. The drawers on her dresser were opening and slamming closed on their own. Again, my mom walked in when my sister started screaming, and everything stopped. My mom could still see the chair rocking, slowing to a stop, and could hear the sound of the dresser handles still swinging. One time, the dog was enjoying having its tummy scratched by no one. We were all watching her enjoying life, and then she opened her eyes, saw all of us sitting there, and jumped up clearly bothered, wanting to know who was just petting her. My grandma said she saw people playing cards in my sister's room one night. She was on medication, but given the other strange occurrences, it might be valid. I think there was more, but I can't remember. Story 28. A few things come to mind. One of them wasn't seen, but this was about 18 years ago. My girlfriend and I were lying in bed at her house, and normally she kept the door shut and the cats out to prevent them from climbing on the bed and licking our faces. I felt something on top of the covers on my leg, like the weight of a cat, and I sleepily mentioned to her that one of the cats had gotten inside. She replied that she was sure they weren't in there. Then she felt the covers pull, as if something had run under the bed. We turned on the lights, and sure enough, there were no cats in the room, but she had a scratch on her hand and was bleeding. Story 29. About a decade ago, I was convinced I saw the brother of a friend who had committed suicide a year earlier while I was walking back to my car one night. The street was crowded as it was outside a movie premiere, and it was raining heavily. I stopped while my wife kept walking and stared at him for what felt like an eternity from a relatively short distance. People became irritated that I was taking up valuable space. I even worked up the courage to tell my friend, and he told me he had been dreaming about his brother and having conversations with him in his sleep. Story 30. Driving on the interstate late at night, the road was quite foggy, which reduced visibility. In the distance, I saw a light moving back and forth through the fog in the middle of the road, becoming more pronounced as I approached. When I got closer, I realized that it was a man waving his phone flashlight to alert oncoming traffic. Just past him, 2 cars had just crashed, and there were bodies scattered across the road. There were no first responders present, only chaos and the man flashing his light. Story 31. My brother was playing with his dog in our backyard one night. Our house was adjacent to some trees on a large piece of property where an elderly couple lived. My brother accidentally threw the toy too high, and it got stuck in a tree. Something then returned it to him. I still have no idea how that happened. Story 32. A headless horse made of white mist walked through the grass, triggering the motion sensor floodlight. Story 33. I have a vague memory of finding a dead body on a family member's property. It was a large wooded area with the nearest neighbor miles away. I was so young, but I remember being with a group of cousins. We were walking the property, feeling bored, and we found something covered in bushes not far from the house, within view. Suddenly, the older cousins told the group we were heading back to the house. I didn't see it, but I saw the bushes they had looked in and remember it being large enough to definitely hide something. The police came and the cousins told us they took the body. Story 34. During our road trip to Disney World last summer, my husband, best friend, and I were driving through the middle of nowhere in South Carolina during a terrible thunderstorm. We saw a faded religious sign discussing the punishments in hell awaiting sinners. As we got closer, we noticed a group of 5 to 6 people holding blood-stained crosses beneath the sign, drenched in the rain. We still have no idea what that was about. Story 35. In early elementary school, we were playing in the back of the field near the fence. There was a house that backed up to the fence, with a window thrown open and a man growling at us while wearing a hairy and scary mask. I'm 51 years old, and my friend and I still think of that 45 years later. Whoever lived in that house was there for many years. The same old cars were in the driveway when I drove by in my early 20s. I wonder how many kids he scarred for life. Story 36. I conducted a North Atlantic search and rescue mission back in the 1980s. We responded to a boat in distress, but when we arrived, all we found was debris and bodies. As we were pulling bodies out of the water, I came across a little girl, estimated to be around 5 to 9 years old, barely alive. She looked at me, and when I reached down to grab her arm below the elbow, her skin devolved. I got her up, and she held on to me as tightly as possible. I handed her off to a medic and then realized the object she was clinging to was her deceased mother, whom I assumed was her mother. They medevaced her out of there, and I never found out if she survived. I've always told myself that she did. Story 37. That's unbelievable. These unsettling individuals do not seem afraid of facing consequences for this unacceptable behavior. It astonishes me. Story 38. Fictional or non-fictional? For the latter, my life from August to October was intense. I look back and realize I was living in a psychological thriller during that time. It still somewhat applies, but it's not really creepy to me anymore because, aside from it not being as severe, I'm used to it and don't care. Story 39. My brother's friend's brother was playing in a car and smiling when I walked past him. Later, I walked by their house, and his father was standing naked by the glass patio door. Story 40. I wouldn't call this creepy, but it was horrific. Back in the early 2000s, there was a video circulating online of a Middle Eastern journalist who sympathized with the West being beheaded. It was rough. Story 41. An eyeball in my bathtub drain. The issue is I don't remember waking up, so I have no clue if it was a dream or reality. Story 42. I was at home watching television when my dad's friend from his band came over to drop off his belongings. A young man, about 20 years old, entered the house. I mistakenly thought he was with my dad's friend, but he said he had never met him. He was very tall and large, with a buzz cut and a plaid shirt. He walked around the living room and then left. It wasn't overly creepy, but it scared me. Story 43. I have found severed animal heads a few times in the woods, but I think it is just the foxes or maybe raccoons finding a carcass. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.